When Congressman Matt Gaetz called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett ghetto on live television, he thought he'd rattled her. He expected her to snap, to give him the reaction he could spin into a headline. Instead, Jasmine Crockett stayed calm, fixed her gaze on the camera, and delivered a response that not only silenced him, but carved its place in history. The studio was a pressure cooker, the air thick with unspoken tension. 4 panelists sat around a glossy glass table, their faces catching the harsh glow of studio lights. The segment was billed as a discussion on economic recovery in low-income communities, a topic that promised data and policy. But as live debates often do, it spiraled into something raw and unscripted. Matt Gaetz was in his comfort zone, dominating the conversation. He leaned into the microphone, his signature smirk flickering, projecting the confidence of someone who believed he was the smartest in the room. "Let's cut through the noise," he said, his hand slicing the air dismissively. Dumping money into failing schools and slapping a reform label on it doesn't move the needle. It's just bad policy. His tone was patronizing, as if he'd already won the argument before anyone else spoke. The other panelists shifted, some nodding faintly, others scribbling notes to avoid engaging. Jasmine Crockett had been quiet, her silence deliberate. She wasn't silent because she lacked answers. She knew the game of these panels. Let the interrupters exhaust themselves. Let them dig their own traps, then step in with precision. She sat upright, her hands folded, her eyes scanning the room. She'd been in enough debates to recognize the moment when bluster would give way to opportunity. When Gaetz paused, she seized it. "If by failing schools, you mean schools starved of funding, stripped of teachers, and abandoned by state budgets," she said, her voice steady, "then yes, let's pour money into them. Communities that have been systematically robbed don't need your lectures. They need repair." The host, a seasoned journalist named Ellen Harper, stirred in her seat, sensing the shift. "Congresswoman, can you clarify what you mean by robbed?" she asked, trying to keep the discussion on track. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I mean decades of redlining, underinvestment, and policies that prioritize wealthy districts while leaving places like South Dallas to scrape by." The host, a seasoned journalist named Ellen Harper, stirred in her seat, sensing the shift. "Congresswoman, can you clarify what you mean by robbed?" she asked, trying to keep the discussion on track. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I mean decades of redlining, underinvestment, and policies that prioritize wealthy districts while leaving places like South Dallas to scrape by." Gaetz's smirk faltered for a split second. He leaned forward, his voice rising to cut her off. "Congresswoman, spare us the dramatics," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You're just being ghetto." The words slipped out softly, almost conversational, but it struck like a thunderclap. The studio went silent. The other panelists froze, their pens hovering over notepads. Ellen Harper blinked twice, her mouth slightly open. Viewers at home, from retirees in Florida to teachers in Ohio, felt the air leave the room. It wasn't just the word. It was the way he wielded it, like a blade disguised as banter, meant to reduce her to a stereotype in front of millions. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, adjusted her microphone with one hand, and locked eyes with the camera, addressing not just Gaetz, but every viewer watching. "I'm not surprised you went there, Congressman," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "When black women speak with conviction, when we dare to challenge power, we don't get the courtesy of being called assertive or passionate. We get labeled. You say ghetto like it's an insult. Let me tell you what I hear when you say that word. I hear South Dallas. I hear survival. I hear my mother, Marlene, working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, and still walking into PTA meetings with food stamps in her purse and dignity in her step. That's what you're trying to dismiss, but you can't, because that's strength you'll never understand." Gaetz shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping the table. He opened his mouth to respond, but Ellen Harper jumped in. "Let's keep this on policy," she said, her voice tight, trying to steer the ship back to safer waters. But it was too late. The moment was already burning across X, shared and reposted by viewers who felt every word. Some called Jasmine a queen, their posts filled with crown emojis. Others argued she should have walked off the set, refusing to dignify the insult. But for countless black women watching, from nurses in Atlanta to retirees in Chicago, her response was a quiet thank you. They knew that sting, the weight of being labeled in meetings, at school gates, in boardrooms. The panel stumbled on, pivoting awkwardly to student loan policy, but no one was listening. The internet was alive with Jasmine's words, her composure, her refusal to shrink. Her hands, though, told a different story. They stayed steady on the table, but her fingers tapped faintly, a rhythm of everything she held back. She knew the trap. If she raised her voice, if she let the anger show, they'd paint her as the angry black woman they were already primed to see. So she stayed measured, her words doing the work her hands couldn't. From Oakland to Tampa, viewers felt it. Women who'd carried that same label sat up straighter, their chests tight with recognition. This wasn't just a political spat. It was about something older, deeper, labels that stick no matter how many degrees you earn, elections you win, or seats you take in Congress. Jasmine Crockett dismantled that label on live TV, her voice an unyielding force. Her story didn't start in that studio. Before she was Congresswoman Crockett, she was Jazz, a girl with no spotlight, no security detail, no tailored suits for national TV. She was a skinny kid in South Dallas, her hands rough from helping her uncle change brake pads under the relentless Texas sun. South Dallas didn't teach gently. It threw lessons at you raw. Speak up, or the noise sirens, bus brakes, men arguing across corners, mothers calling kids inside before the streetlights would swallow you whole. "You got a voice, Jazz," her uncle would say, wiping grease from his hands. "Don't let it rust." At home, her mother, Marlene, was the law. She didn't need to yell. A single glance could rearrange the air. Marlene cleaned houses in Highland Park 6 days a week, her wrists aching, her fingers scarred from bleach. She'd come home, cook chicken and rice, and collapse on the couch, her church socks still on. "You do what you gotta do," she'd tell Jazz, her voice tired but firm. "And you do it right." Outside, Jazz walked a fine line. Too smart for some, not real enough for others. She wore off-brand sneakers, always a size too small, and gel that irritated her scalp. But she carried herself tall, even when kids teased her for talking white, or teachers misread her confidence as defiance. Her first brush with ghetto wasn't from a classmate. It came from a substitute teacher in 4th grade. Jazz stood up during a lesson on Martin Luther King Jr., challenging the worksheet's claim that his work was mission accomplished. "His dream isn't done," she said, her small voice firm. "People still treat us wrong." The teacher chuckled, her tone dripping with condescension. "Well, aren't you a little firecracker? Real ghetto fabulous, huh?" Jazz didn't know what ghetto fabulous meant, but the way it landed felt like a slap. At home, she told Marlene. Her mother didn't storm the school or write a complaint. She looked at Jazz and said, "Next time, don't stop. Finish your point. Say it louder." That stuck with her. In high school, Jazz joined the debate club, not because she loved arguing, but because she was tired of her ideas needing a translator. "You're too sharp to be ignored," her coach told her after she dismantled an opponent's argument with facts. She didn't want to shout. She wanted to win with truth, to speak so clearly no one could twist her words. She got good at it. By the time she reached Prairie View A&M, people knew her name not for flashy clothes or social clout, but for her ability to call out nonsense in a way that left people speechless. "Jazz don't play," a classmate said once, laughing. "She'll make you rethink your whole life." South Dallas never left her. It lived in how she wore her hair, how she asked questions that made people squirm, how she remembered names others overlooked. Professors warned her to soften her approach. "Don't come off too bold," one said before a mock trial. Colleagues whispered similar advice. "Don't dress too loud. Don't talk about where you're from like it's a badge." But she didn't tone down. She leaned in, listened harder, paid attention. That badge carried stories of girls who got ignored, boys who didn't make it past 22, mothers who balanced 2 jobs and a bus route just to make a parent-teacher conference. "I'm not here for me," she'd tell herself. "I'm here for them." When Matt Gaetz threw that word at her, he didn't just insult Jasmine. He insulted every Sunday hair press, every late-night shift, every milk crate bookshelf in South Dallas. By the time she reached law school at Texas Southern's Thurgood Marshall School of Law, she'd learned the law wasn't blind. It squinted, especially at people who looked like her. "The system's not broken," a professor told her. "It's built this way. You want to change it? Get in the room." She took that to heart. Her first job wasn't glamorous. A cramped public defender's office in Shreveport, Louisiana, where the air conditioner groaned and the coffee machine was louder than the copier. Every Monday, the waiting room was packed with faces that could have been her cousins, her uncles, her high school friends. "They don't see us," a client told her once, his voice low. "They see trouble." Boys caught with small amounts of weed got harsher sentences than white men with long rap sheets. Mothers lost custody because they couldn't afford childcare. Grandmothers took pleas for scams they didn't understand. Jasmine never got used to it. She got sharper. In court, she spoke fast, clear, no nonsense. "My client deserves a chance," she'd argue, laying out facts like bricks. Judges leaned forward. Prosecutors who rolled their eyes at first started respecting her grind. "You're relentless," one said after a tough case. She smiled. "I have to be." But the real lessons came outside the courtroom. Driving home once, still in her blazer and heels, she was pulled over. The officer ignored her briefcase. "Whose car is this?" he asked, his tone implying she didn't belong. She realized then, degrees didn't shield you. Respectability didn't save you. She stopped trying to play nice with systems that weren't built for her. Back in Texas, she launched her own practice. She defended tenants bullied out of their apartments by greedy landlords. She helped expunge records for kids who'd been chewed up by the system before they could vote. She stood by women escaping abusive relationships, women who had nowhere else to turn. "You're not alone," she'd tell them, her voice soft but firm. Word spread, not just because she won cases, but because she showed up with time, with heart, with truth. She remembered clients' kids' names. She explained legal jargon line by line. She stayed late. She followed up. When a Dallas City Council seat opened, people started saying her name. "Me? A politician?" She'd laugh, shaking her head. But deep down, she knew she was building something bigger than a career. She was building trust. Then came the George Floyd protests, when grief and anger filled the streets. People were tired of asking politely for justice. Jasmine didn't just march. She represented protesters who were arrested, got them out of jail, stood in court, and said what needed saying, even when judges sighed. "This isn't about chaos," she told one. "It's about people demanding to be seen." A group of organizers approached her. "Run for the State House," they said. "Take the fight inside the room." She hesitated. Politics meant cameras, critics, more whispers about being too loud, too black, too ghetto. But then she thought of her mother, of the girls in her neighborhood, of the courtrooms that chewed up people like them. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." Her campaign wasn't flush with cash, but it had momentum. Volunteers knocked on doors in triple-digit heat. Teenagers handed out flyers after school. Elders slipped $5 bills from grocery envelopes. "You're one of us," an older woman told her at a rally. "Don't forget that." She won. Then she won again, climbing to the U.S. Congress, where her voice carried further. But Congress wasn't a warm embrace. She noticed the stares when she wore her natural curls, the extra scrutiny at security, the murmurs when she asked pointed questions in committee meetings. "You're too direct," a colleague whispered once. She smiled. Good. They tried to mold her into something safer, but she kept showing up as herself, a South Dallas girl with courtroom grit and a memory like steel. After the show, the studio lights dimmed and the set cleared as if nothing had happened. The producers acted like they hadn't heard a thing. The makeup assistant gave Jasmine a fleeting smile before hurrying off. Ellen Harper, the host, avoided her eyes. Jasmine unclipped her mic slowly, her hands steady but her stomach churning. She'd been insulted before in courtrooms, on X, even by fellow lawmakers. But this was different. That word, ghetto, thrown with such casual venom in front of millions. It wasn't just what Gaetz said. It was how easily it rolled off his tongue, like he'd been waiting to use it, like he thought it would shut her down or win him points with some viewers. In the car to her hotel, she watched the clip on her phone. It was already spreading on X, her name trending. Messages poured in, some cheering, some mocking. One post cut deeper than the insult. "This is why we don't put them on panels." She felt the weight of it, not just for herself but for every woman who'd been dismissed the same way. In her hotel room, she kicked off her shoes and let the silence settle. It was too quiet, too cold. She turned on the TV for noise, flipping through channels. One was already dissecting the exchange. A pundit said she'd overreacted. Another smirked, "Ghetto's just a word now." She muted it. Her team texted, "We can draft a statement, Jasmine." "Say the word." She shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. She needed to think. She replayed her words in her mind. "You hear ghetto." "I hear South Dallas." She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pointed fingers, hadn't given them the outburst they wanted. She'd answered with clarity, with weight. Now she had to decide what came next. She pulled out a yellow notepad, a habit from her trial prep days, and scribbled thoughts. Why is it ghetto when I speak my truth? Why do I have to dress like I'm in church to be taken seriously? Why do we pretend these words don't carry history? She didn't sleep that night, not out of rage but out of responsibility. She knew girls were watching. Teachers would play that clip in classrooms. Mothers would sit their daughters down and say, "See? You stay calm, no matter what they throw at you." She hated that part, the expectation that black women always had to absorb, always had to be the bigger person. No man, congressman or not, should get to redefine you in a moment and expect silence in return. By morning, her inbox was flooded. Civil rights attorneys sent support. Journalists requested interviews. A retired librarian from Memphis wrote, "You gave us the words we've been searching for." She sat by the hotel window, watching the Los Angeles skyline brighten. She'd speak again, but not the way they expected. Not in a polished press conference or a rehearsed thread on X. She'd speak in her own language, one forged in barbershops, kitchen tables, and city bus conversations. This wasn't about clapping back at Gaetz. It was about drawing a line and making sure it held. Going viral wasn't free, especially for a black woman. Some advisors urged her to stay quiet. "Let it blow over," one said. "Don't give it more oxygen," another added. But Jasmine had learned long ago, in courtrooms and community centers, that silence didn't protect you. It just gave someone else the pen to write your story. By the second day, the narrative was already twisting. A conservative outlet ran a headline, "Crockett overreacts, pulls race card on live TV." A primetime anchor used air quotes when calling her aggressive. Some posts on X edited clip, cutting Gaetz's insult and painting her response as unprovoked. But people watched the full video. They saw a woman stay calm under fire. They saw restraint, strength, fire held in check. By day 3, regular people started speaking out. A retired judge from Des Moines posted online, If you think Jasmine Crockett was out of line, you've never sat in a room where black women have to smile through disrespect. A high school principal in Fresno showed the clip in her civics class. What does this teach us about leadership? She asked her students. Half the girls quoted Jasmine's line about her mother's dignity and food stamps. An activist shared the video on X, saying, "This wasn't just for her. This was for every one of us who's been labeled." Celebrities joined in. A Grammy-winning singer posted, "Don't let anyone shame you for where you come from, Congresswoman, we're with you." An actor wrote, "This is why we need her voice." She showed more grace than most could muster. Her inbox became a flood of stories. A woman in HR wrote, "I code switch every day to seem professional. Watching you stand tall made me cry in the break room." A grandmother from Mississippi, who never finished high school, said, "You reminded me of my daughters, all teachers now." Holding your head up is resistance. The backlash grew too. Conservative commentators accused her of weaponizing identity politics. Others mocked her for mentioning South Dallas, as if pride in her roots was a flaw. A congressional aide leaked that some lawmakers were questioning her temperament behind closed doors. Another source whispered she might be too polarizing for leadership roles. She wasn't shocked. Black women were expected to endure, not respond. If they did, they were angry. If they smiled, they were performing. Jasmine chose a local Fort Worth station for her first interview, a place tied to her childhood visits with cousins. It was deliberate, personal. The anchor, a veteran reporter named Carla Sims, asked about the backlash. "Congresswoman, some say you lean too hard into race. How do you respond?" Jasmine looked at her, unflinching. "I've been told my whole life I'm too much," she said. "Too direct, too passionate, too black, too ghetto. I'm done apologizing for any of it. If my truth makes people uncomfortable, they need to ask themselves why." Carla nodded, her eyes softening. "And what about Congressman Gaetz?" She pressed. Jasmine smiled faintly. "I said what I needed to say. The record's clear." 3 days after the incident, Jasmine sat in a small sunlit room with a basic webcam and a chipped ceramic mug on the desk. No production crew, no ring light, just her voice and a wooden chair. "I wasn't going to do this," she began, looking into the camera like she was talking to a friend. "But I've read your messages. I've felt your stories. This moment doesn't belong to me alone anymore." It wasn't a press release or a polished rebuttal. It was raw, like a conversation at a kitchen table after the world tried to knock you down. She didn't name Gaetz. She didn't have to. "I've heard words like ghetto, unprofessional, angry my entire life," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I used to think if I dressed right, spoke softly, got the degrees, won the elections, those words would stop chasing me. They don't. They just show up in fancier suits." She paused, letting the silence carry weight. "I wasn't offended because I've never been ghetto. I was offended because I have, and I know exactly what that word means when it's thrown like that. It's not just a label. It's a cage, a way to clip someone's wings before they even try to fly." The comments on X poured in, thousands every minute. Teachers wrote about sharing it with students. Mothers said they showed it to their daughters. Men admitted they hadn't realized how deep the word cut until now. But Jasmine did more than defend herself. She invited a conversation. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said near the end. "I'm asking for honesty. Until we're honest about who gets labeled and why, we're just dressing up the same old disrespect in different words." The video passed 1 million views in hours. Churches played it at youth groups. Nurses watched it on break. It wasn't just a political moment. It was a cultural shift. A pastor in Cleveland built a sermon around it, titled "Dignity in the Fire." "Congresswoman Crockett showed us how to stand tall," he told his congregation. A Detroit hairstylist spoke to a local news crew. "She said what we've all been holding in, and she said it plain." A youth basketball coach in Tallahassee paused practice to play the clip through a Bluetooth speaker. "This is how you carry yourself when they come for you," he told his players. A woman named Clarice from Amarillo sent a text with a photo of her 12-year-old daughter holding a printed copy of Jasmine's quote. "She's using it for her school speech," Clarice wrote. "Thank you for saying it out loud." That text hit Jasmine hardest. When you speak with grace, when you hold your ground without shrinking, it's not about winning a debate. It's about who hears you, who stands taller because you didn't back down. She leaned back in her office chair, folded her hands, and let herself breathe. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. But the aftermath wasn't just headlines. It was a reckoning. Matt Gaetz didn't apologize. The morning after the debate, he went on a radio show and doubled down. "Some people are too sensitive these days," he said, chuckling. "If she can't handle a little heat, maybe politics isn't her game." He thought he could spin it into a story of toughness, that he'd been blunt and she'd overreacted. He was wrong. This wasn't a political misstep. It was a cultural flashpoint. Sponsors for his upcoming book tour began pulling out, quietly at first. A university in Oregon canceled his scheduled talk, citing community concerns. A tech conference in Seattle dropped him from a keynote panel. One organizer posted on X, "We can't invite black women to speak on our stages and then platform someone who disrespects them like that on national TV." His team scrambled, releasing a 3-line statement about respecting colleagues and regretting any misunderstanding. It didn't stop the bleeding. Behind closed doors, congressional aides leaked tension. A senior advisor reportedly told Gaetz, "You didn't just make this about you. You made it harder for all of us." 2 Republican colleagues issued statements, carefully worded but pointed, about the need for respectful dialogue and avoiding racially charged language. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it was enough to show the ground shifting beneath him. Constituents in Florida wrote letters, not just to his office but to local papers. A high school senior published an op-ed in a Tampa newspaper. "I've heard ghetto used to put people down my whole life," she wrote. "Nobody explains what it means. They just use it to make us feel small. Jasmine Crockett showed me I don't have to shrink." Gaetz went quiet. His public appearances dwindled. His X account fell silent. His base stayed loyal, but the broader public mood had shifted. People were tired of watching black women in leadership carry the burden of grace, restraint, and intelligence, only to be slapped with a word meant to drag them down. Jasmine didn't gloat. When reporters cornered her in a press scrum, asking if she had a message for Gaetz, she looked up from her folder and said, "I said what I needed to say. I said it clearly the first time." Then she walked away. The label Gaetz tried to pin on her stuck to him instead, not because of one moment, but because it revealed a pattern. 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood in a Tulsa gymnasium, speaking to high school girls. No cameras, no press, just metal folding chairs and the faint smell of floor wax. The girls wore every expression curious, skeptical, distracted. Some whispered, twirling their braids. Jasmine didn't put on a show. "I'm not here to talk at you," she said, her voice warm. "I'm here because I've been where you are, sitting in a room where nobody thinks you're listening." She told them about South Dallas, about courtrooms where she was the only one who looked like her, about being talked over in meetings. She told them about Gaetz's insult. The room grew quiet. A girl in the back raised her hand. "How did you not cuss him out?" she asked, half joking, half awed. The gym filled with laughter. Jasmine smiled. "I wasn't talking to him," she said. "I was talking to you. To every girl who's been told to speak softer, to be less, to smile more. If I'd lost my cool, they'd have ignored my words and focused on my volume. So I gave them words they couldn't dismiss." Another girl, Isabel, asked, "If you could go back, what would you tell yourself at our age?" Jasmine looked at the rows of faces, each with its own story, and said, "I'd tell myself respect isn't something you chase by changing who you are. It's something you claim by standing exactly as you are. The girls clapped, some standing, their energy shifting. After the talk, a girl named Kiara approached, clutching a small notebook. I wrote poems, she said quietly. I stopped because someone said they sounded too ghetto. Jasmine flipped through the pages. The words were raw, honest, alive. Kiara, she said, if this is what ghetto sounds like, the world better start listening. They hugged, no cameras to capture it, no hashtags to follow. On the flight back to Washington, Jasmine thought about ghetto. It was meant to shame, to box in, to wound. But it had sparked something instead. Respectability was a tightrope dress, a certain way, speak a certain way, and maybe you'd get a seat at the table. But what if the table wasn't built for you? What if every time you reached for respect, you were asked to trade your truth? Gaetz didn't see it. His insult wasn't about her tone. It was about her identity. He wanted her to shrink. She stood taller. And people who'd spent their lives dimming themselves stood with her. Not because she had power, but because she gave permission to speak real. To dress like your mother taught you. To hold space without apology. 1 year later, almost to the day, the network invited them back. Same glossy table, same setup, same co-panelist. The topic was national housing policy. But everyone knew the real draw. Crockett versus Gaetz, round 2. Her team was wary. You don't owe them anything, an advisor said. You've already made your point. Jasmine saw it differently. This isn't about him, she said. It's about every girl still watching. She walked into the studio in a burnt orange suit, no apologies in her stance. Her hair was styled in tight coils, pinned back to show gold studs in her ears. She carried herself like armor, her presence a message before she spoke. The show began with polite small talk, but the tension was palpable. Gaetz kept glancing at her, as if waiting for a spark, a confrontation he could use. Jasmine stayed focused, breaking down housing data, calling out policy gaps with precision. Her tone never wavered, but her words carried weight. Then Gaetz made his move. Mid-sentence, he leaned forward. Congresswoman Crockett, I'm sure your community cares about these issues, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But turning this into an emotional plea doesn't solve anything. It wasn't as blatant as ghetto, but the intent was the same, a coded swipe, cleaned up for prime time. Jasmine took a single breath. Without shifting in her seat, she looked at him. Congressman, you call it emotional when I talk about housing because you've never lived next to a payday loan shop and a liquor store instead of a grocery, she said. You've never had to choose between rent and medicine. You think it's emotional. I think it's lived experience. And if you can't see the difference, that's not my failure. It's yours. The room went quiet. Ellen Harper tried to pivot. Let's move to tax incentives, she said. But the moment was already branded. Gaetz leaned back, his face tight. For once, he had no comeback. The clip hit X within minutes, shared with captions like, "She did it again," and Gaetz didn't see that coming. But it wasn't just her words. It was how she held the room, refusing to be erased. After the show, reporters swarmed. Any comment on Congressman Gaetz? One asked. She smiled, adjusting her folder. The record speaks for itself, she said, and walked off. That night, in her D.C. office, she sorted through emails. One stood out, from a father in Missouri. My daughter watched you tonight, he wrote. She said she wants to be the kind of woman who speaks like you, firm, calm, clear. Thank you. This was never about outshouting Gaetz. It was about redefining what power looks like, who gets to be heard, what leadership means. Jasmine showed that grace isn't weakness, that composure isn't silence. She didn't just respond to an insult. She rewrote the rules of the room. The next time someone watches a woman like her, unapologetic, unfiltered, full of fire, and thinks, she's too much, they might remember Jasmine Crockett. They might see her presence, her words, her refusal to shrink. That's not too much. That's what leadership looks like. If you believe your voice matters, even when it shakes, subscribe. Silence never changed anything.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.